Okay, thanks everybody for joining us for our bylaws committee meeting for the month of April. I'm Patrick Cannell, and want to thank everybody who's here with us. We have a, I think, reasonably tight agenda, but we're going to focus on the ongoing discussion of the language around forming the bylaws committee as a standing committee. So I circulated that to the members of the bylaws committee, and then Scott, I want to maybe turn it over to you to see if I know you wrote back with some comments and some additional language, and wanted to see if you could present that. So why don't I let me see if I can do this at the same time. If I can share the content to the screen. Okay. Can everybody see that?
I can see it.
Okay. And this is really just the document that we workshopped together at our last meeting, and worked through our changes together. So that's what I sent out. So Scott, I guess turn it over to you and see if you wouldn't mind walking us through your changes.
Sure. So basically, I had sent, prior to the last meeting that we had, I had sent you some language. I wasn't able to attend that meeting, but essentially, and I'm echoing, I think, what Robert Dobris mentioned, I think Jakob Gross mentioned, that in order for this committee to have any real purpose, it has to have some authority, I guess, not authority to make decisions, but at least an authority to review a decision that the board intends to make. If a board member feels that there's an issue with a particular decision, and then if ultimately the board chooses to proceed and the bylaws committee feels it's not the right thing to do, to at least have the ability to notify the community of what's happening for transparency. So I proposed a very short preamble purpose, which would simply say that there are basically two things that this committee, I think, should be responsible to take care of. One is to periodically review the bylaws and make changes, which is what we're doing. And the second item is that if a board member, or maybe more than one board member, feels, I don't know how many board members should trigger this, maybe one, maybe more than one, feels that something is happening, a decision is about to be made by the board that they feel violates the bylaws, they want to spend more money than they're authorized to spend, that they should have the right to flag it and to say that we want the bylaws committee to review this and give their opinion of whether or not this is a permissible act. And then there needs to be a mechanism in place where a notice would be sent to the bylaws committee quickly. We would convene quickly and we would render our opinion, which obviously council should be brought in at that point, if possibly at that point, or whether or not we think it's proper or not. And then if the board decides to proceed anyway against the advice of the bylaws committee, that we should have the right to present something to the community, whether it's a document that's sent out to the community or a presentation at the next board meeting, or both. Without that second part, I don't feel this committee, other than looking over some bylaws, is really going to serve the right purpose that it should serve.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Anybody have thoughts or comments?
And can we just get a little more clarification on that? Are we saying that we want to utilize the committee to serve like almost as a de facto board to the community for bylaws? That almost sounds like you're bypassing the board at that point.
We're definitely not bypassing the board. That's not my intent. And the committee itself has absolutely no authority to make any decision. The committee simply can provide its opinion and its advice. We have no authority, this committee, to do anything, to vote on anything, except to vote within our committee on whether or not we think in that scenario that, for instance, a bylaw should be amended, or something that the board is looking to do exceeds the authority of the bylaws of the community. Let's say, for instance, the board comes up with a great idea. Tomorrow it wants to go and open up a restaurant. And everyone's amenable to that. And there's a member or two that says, I don't know if we're allowed to do that. So that would be a perfect example where they would say, okay, why don't we could speak to council here too, obviously, you'll have council, but let's give it to the bylaws committee. Let's ask them to make a first pass at this of what they think and report back.
No, I can certainly understand the intent there, but then once we're starting to bring in counsel and, you know, obviously paying for that, and, you know, to what end would that be, or would that be extreme circumstances would cause something like that?
Ultra Diaries.
I'm not, Dan, I'm just giving an example where if we wanted to bring counsel in, if the board wanted to bring counsel in.
Okay, no, I got you. I'm just trying to understand the full scope. I don't think that it's a horrible idea or anything. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm just trying to get a good understanding of what we're talking about. That's all.
As an example, let's say like what happened in the past, the board felt that they were running into trouble and they needed to spend more than they were authorized to spend. And
Yeah.
they felt it's the good of the community. We need to do this. We need to finish this. So we're gonna blow through these provisions in our bylaws because we have to finish this project. And let's say there was a board member on there who said, you know what? I don't know if we're allowed to do that.
So it sounds to me like what it really is trying to achieve anyway, is a mechanism for minority board members to effectively have a whistleblowing outlet. And I guess I don't see the need to do it through a bylaws committee. It just seems like an extra unnecessary step. The board will have its counsel and get whatever advice it gets. But if there are minority board members who either disagree with that advice or still disagree with a particular decision, I don't see what prevents them from going to the community on their own anyway. And or, you know, if the board needs to adopt a whistleblower policy to protect them, that certainly is something that I'm working on anyway as part of the corporate governance structure. But I guess I just don't see the necessity of having that process there. And as this is currently drafted anyway, the provision without the preamble allows for, it says, this is under sub 1. So the bylaws committee shall be a standing committee charged with 1, providing advice to the board or any board member on the board's or any board member's request for interpretation of the bylaws. So I think that seems to me a fine function if a particular board member wants to get an interpretation of a bylaw outside of council. But the additional process to me just doesn't seem necessary because there are other and better ways to do it.
I think also what Scott's alluding to is like some sort of trigger mechanism. You know, if something had gotten to the point, like if you talk about the assessment, the prior assessment and the project, you're spending past your 17,000 threshold. At what point would the bylaw committee interject and possibly stop somebody from breaking the bylaws with the spending? I think that's kind of what, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's what Scott's trying to get out of that.
I think this community has been a bit traumatized over the last board's activities, and having something like this in place will make people, I think, feel a little bit more comfortable. It doesn't necessarily have to be a whistleblower. It doesn't have to be nefarious conduct. It could just be something that comes up, and they want to have, they know that there's this bylaws committee out there that will opine, will review these issues when they come up, and will report back to them and to the community if the board disagrees.
And my own feeling about this, if I may, is that my experience so far on this committee has been a little bit disquieting to me, because it seems as though there is an attitude on the part of the present board members that is very protective of the board, without regard to the history that we have had with some boards that have been that have been feeling as though they could run this organization without much transparency and without going to the community, even though the bylaws do say that they must go to the community. And we've seen that happen more than once. I have certainly seen it happen with more than one board, not just this last board, but a board that we had 2 decades ago, where the board just went its own way, didn't care what the bylaws said, and we were operating with proxies when the bylaws didn't permit it. I mean, it was just crazy what was going on then. The bylaws committee then, became this very active organization. And then it died. I think that nothing is directed at this board. This board wants to be transparent. This board doesn't want to have people looking over their shoulder and criticizing them, because this board knows that it is clean, pure, and operating just the way it's supposed to operate. And God willing, that's exactly what, or I say, inshallah, so it should be. But that's not what our history is. And this board is not going to be the board that is the only board operating under the bylaws. So I feel very strongly that what Scott is trying to achieve is something that's good, that it would not permit a board to suppress certain information unless it was consistent with the bylaws. Boards have suppressed information, and I can recollect in the last board, certain board members felt that they couldn't even speak because they were told by the majority of the board that they were not speaking for the board, and therefore they should keep their mouths shut. I think that members of the board who are exposed to that kind of thing there should be a mechanism for them to go somewhere, not necessarily first to the community. So I agree with Scott. I think it's a good idea, but I also don't believe that these bylaws as written don't provide a mechanism for that. I think that while it has been watered down somewhat, I think that Patrick did do a good job in putting in a provision that would allow a proceeding for any board member to go to the bylaws committee if there was a feeling that the board was doing something wrong.
Thanks, Robert. Zach and Earl, you have your hands up. I'm just not sure who had it up first. Zach, you're to my left. Oh, Earl, okay.
Zach's prettier than I am, so go ahead, Zach.
I just want to understand it, because I think it makes a lot of sense what Scott wrote. I read it a couple of times and just wrapped my hands around it. But would that have, so what happened last, I guess with the prior board, the previous board, would that have actually prevented anything? Because they did try to go to the community for help, and they left, they resigned. Would this actually solve that situation that happened last time, or is this just a provision that they can, I guess, bring this up a little bit differently? I just want to understand how it impacted differently than what they did last time, I guess, around, right? Three or four board members resigned. They brought it to the community, they looked for help, they looked for some guidance, and it still kind of went out of whack, right? So in this situation, it's kind of, this is in writing, but how do you prevent that from happening regardless? Or how does this help in addition to?
Well, the only mechanism that those board members who felt there was inappropriate action, the only mechanism that they had was to resign. there was no place else to go. There was no
Okay.
organization to support their position, so they just resigned. This would, in a similar situation, presumably give such board members a little bit more clout and visibility. That's all. I don't know that it would solve the problem, but it would create a channel into which they could pursue what
Yeah,
they
no, and my understanding was that they went to the community for the help and some support, like as it's a lot different now. There's a lot more people helping and being part of this. So there's, even with this mechanism that's being put in place, I think that the community itself would be more helpful because much more people seem to be involved this go around. So,
There's no organized ways act to go to the community.
yeah,
That doesn't mean anything, other than speaking to people. This is a process that I envision come to this particular group, and there'll be a process of we'll review what's proposed and get back to the board and be allowed to advise the community if we feel the board is still doing something that we don't agree with.
yeah, understood. This makes sense.
Thanks, Zach. Earl?
I mean, Scott, you know how I feel. I'm 1,000% on board with the process. I think it's agnostic of this group of 11 versus another group of 11 that show up in a couple of years. Robert, I do take a bit, your tone at times almost seems humorous, as if we don't, this board feels as if they're above reproach. I don't think no board should ever be above reproach. I can say my take is less the purpose, but more the audience. I from someone who has a family full of attorneys, my sister being one who is the vice president of the Georgia Bar. I'm not impressed by any attorney no more than I would be for someone who busts their ass at Home Depot. Come on, Patrick, you know what I'm saying. So I want to ensure that my view, and I have more than just 1 or 2 degrees, that this isn't about attorneys. I understand there's a need for someone who has a acute understanding of bylaws, but I don't think you have to have, in fact, let me correct myself. You do not have to have a law degree to understand the facilitation of bylaws and contract and tort law. So that's my only take. I think even Leslie mentioned it several calls ago. We need to have balance. I think anyone who wants to be participatory in this process should be able to be participatory in the process. I think ensuring that we have a minimal amount of legal advisories to participate on this committee is essential, but it should not, and I won't be silent if it becomes a prerequisite or a soundboard to evaluate or assess who should and shouldn't be on this board, considering the lackluster turnout that we have from month to month. But again, I've always been a proponent of this, even when Patrick and I have had conversations, even before this dialogue came up, that we definitely need one, and I'm supportive of the committee itself. I just want to ensure that the committee has balance and that no person that pays taxes and resides in this community isn't able to feel that they have a right to be here, even if it's done subtly in a wink nod manner. I think everyone should feel like I can participate, and collectively, however it's managed, it's managed. That's all I have to say. I apologize, Patrick. Go ahead. And you know I was joking. You know I love attorneys.
Yeah, I was joking in my response. I understand your point. Dan?
Patrick, if I may say something, I don't see my little hand. I can't find it on my phone.
That's okay. Go ahead, Leslie.
But I totally agree with Earl. A couple of things that I keep hearing in this discussion is I feel, I think, and we can't feel or think. Whatever we put out, it has to be plain enough that everybody will understand it. I won't have the room to interpret this in a different manner than somebody else will interpret it. It has to be clear. Another thing that in the preamble that was submitted, we have legal jargon there, ultra-vires, and it's like, okay, not everybody's going to understand that language. In the bylaws committee word, the second paragraph, the bylaws committee shall have up to 9 members. The president of the board shall serve on the committee along with 2 other current members. The president of the board shall serve on that committee as what? As a chairman, as a liaison to the board, but as what? It has to be clearly stated what we can't, because the people are gonna think, the fox is being put in charge of the hen house. So it has to be clarified what the president of the board role would be in the bylaws committee, because it could send a message that is creating or approving or suggesting bylaws changes that would keep at least the current board, because the next board that comes on might take on the bylaws again and redo it again. But at least on this current board would be seen as if the president of the board is, I will say, suggesting at this point bylaws that will be beneficial to the board as a whole, or to the president, or whatever it is. But this has to be clarified enough where it says what the president of the board shall serve as. And back to my feeling, I interpret this way, and I think about it this way. I think you're trying to say this. No, we can't have that. It has to be very, very simple, plain. It can't be a gray zone on it, because you and I will interpret things different ways. That's all I have to say for right now.
Thanks, Leslie. Just to address the first point you made, I just point out unless the bylaws are amended, the way they read now, the chairperson of any of the committees has to be a board member. So I think we need to, I'm not disputing your point about the optics of it, or whether it's clear enough as written right now, but it has to work with that other provision unless that other provision itself gets amended too, which, believe me, I'd be in favor of. Dan.
I guess we could just leave it at this. The understanding from Robert and others are we're just looking for an accountability factor, at least when it comes to holding the board accountable for adhering to the bylaws. I guess my concern would be, we only go so far than to use the words contempt. I mean, so we would definitely need, to Leslie's point, some specific clarity as to where and how far that goes. I'm all for holding board members accountable to the bylaws, no question on that. But how far and to what end should that go? I don't know, that explains all of that, if that's understandable.
Okay.
It raises a very interesting point, what Dan just said, that how far does it go? Because it's not with regard to this particular bylaw, but with another bylaw that maybe will be on our agenda one day. And that has to do with the water company. The water company passed its own set of bylaws. I don't know how, but the water company said that no member of the board will have to have any responsibility financially in the event that criminal charges are imposed against any of the board members, and that the community had to indemnify them for with respect to any defense. I found that to be quite an extraordinary bylaw, because it actually did talk about what happens, not when we're in contempt, but what happens to a board member when criminal charges are brought against the board member. And what that board did was essentially it indemnified itself against any financial burden that they might have as a result of that. Quite extraordinary. I don't know that we need to talk about what certainly the bylaws committee doesn't have any power to do anything other than be a way to communicate with something to the community that has some legitimacy. That's all. That's all. It is part of the board. It is appointed by the board, and its function merely is to understand the bylaws, create new bylaws, and be available to any board member or the board to interpret those bylaws. That's it. I didn't say only lawyers could do that. I never said that. Anybody can do that. Anybody can do that.
Robert, let me chime in. I want to be clear.
Sure.
It's not you saying it, it's your inference. And we've all circled this horse a couple of times. I think secondarily, your point is 1000% fair. You're spot on. But the other side of that is this committee can't create a bylaw. So I want to make sure that's course corrected. This committee can suggest and or recommend a bylaw be brought to the board, and either modified, removed, or created. But this committee specifically cannot create a bylaw.
Earl, neither can the board.
Says that.
Neither can the board.
You're 1000% right. So I want to make sure that there's clarity, because we are attorneys. There are some attorneys on this call that we're not misinterpreting anything. I think also, for me, this is a must. You have to have this to provide a forum for board members, if they see that things are going awry, that they have the ability and the mechanism to bring it to the table in a manner that it's not viewed as politicized. So again, Robert's got 1000% on board, but how do we also prevent it from being politicized?
Is the intent here, to bypass or to counter the code of conduct that the board members have? Is that what the intent here is?
No, it's
The intent here is that the bylaws committee should be a resource to a board member or the board as a whole. That's it. Everyone's deeming that this will only be used when there's nefarious conduct. That's.
No, I get it. It just, I guess with some of the questions that are going back and forth, it made me, think about the code of conduct and how that relates to, sharing information. And is that what the understanding here is, or are we just basically saying we're going to use the bylaw committee as a sounding board, and in the event that a board member or board members go rogue, the information will get shared, so that way the public is aware that we don't.
No, I don't think one has anything necessarily to do with the other. Dan, I think an individual board member's conduct, one way or another, is something that the board would have to deal with. It's not a function for the bylaws committee. This is really if the board is about to make a decision and there's a minority group or even one board member who feels that that action, that decision would violate the bylaws. It's a place for that board member or a group of board members to go to say, hey, do you think that's right? And more or less get a ruling. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but that's kind of what I think it would envision, as opposed to judging any individual board member's conduct one way or another.
And I would agree with that. The more communication, the better. A sounding board, I guess. But the only difference would be at that point, those who are determining whether or not that's within the bylaw scope are obviously part of the committee. They're not necessarily elected, right? So I don't know if that would change things or perspectives or anything like that as well, but just my personal thoughts. I'm all for accountability. I think that I think at least at face value, I support with what Scott's proposing here, and appreciate everything. I will have to cut it short here. I have to get on another committee meeting.
Yeah, me too. I have to drop. Patrick, everyone, apologize, but I have to drop for another meeting I have to get prepared for too.
All right. Well, do we want to vote on? Well, I guess we need to figure out. And I don't know if you want to do like a motion to amend, Scott, or whether we just as a consensus see whether that the preamble language is something that folks want to include as is.
How about we digest everything that was talked about tonight? We send a few emails during the week and maybe edit this or give suggestions about this, and then come back and make a decision. Let's just not wait a month.
Yeah, I would only say I think we owe it to Robert and Scott and the group who proposed this that we action it. So, I mean, Patrick, I'll defer to you. I would not want to wait another month. My vote is yes, but I hear Leslie and I understand her position, but we owe it to the members on the call that have put some time into this to action on this.
Yeah, and wasn't this a topic that was discussed prior as well, Robert?
Yeah, we toiled over the language at our last meeting, and then Scott offered the preamble language as a sort of an addition to it. So that's really kind of the issue, is whether, I mean, if it wasn't for, and Scott, don't take this the wrong way, if it wasn't for Scott offering that preamble language, I think we'd just have taken a vote on this provision one way or the other. But I think the first question we need to tackle is, as a group, are we comfortable with the addition of the preamble language and the process language that Scott's laid out?
Yeah, my understanding was the same as Patrick's. That is, I thought that we went through all of this already, and that preamble had been put forward by Scott at least two meetings ago. As a result of all of the conversations that we had, the preamble was not included. Patrick went back and did some changes. Those changes, as I said, might not have been as strong as some of us might have felt they should have been, or they may have been too strong for some of us who think they shouldn't have been made. But the question in my mind was, is this proposal now, as Patrick has amended it, acceptable? And I just heard Earl say it was acceptable to him. It's acceptable to me, I want you to know. And I personally do not believe we need, at this point, the preamble. I think it's more important for this committee. This is the first bylaw that we have taken up of what I believe should be about 35 bylaws. This is the first one we've taken up, and we've already had difficulty passing it for 4 meetings. This does not bode well. this does not bode well for some of the more difficult bylaws that we may want to discuss. But I call the question and ask for a vote on the bylaw as it has been amended by Patrick without the preamble.
Robert, do you want to motion that for vote right now?
Yeah, that's what he's calling the question.
Yes.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right. So as is what we're voting on. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Anyone
I will
opposed?
abstain.
I'm
No,
sorry.
I'll abstain. I'll abstain.
Abstain.
I would oppose.
Any recusals or abstentions? It appears that the motion passes. So I think what we have to do now is to bring this piece
To the board.
to the full board. Full
Absolutely.
board will vote on it, and then assuming it makes it out of there, then it goes in a package for the annual meeting with whatever else we're gonna include. Okay.
But Patrick, I think just, obviously, this can't pass unless the community approves it.
Right. That's what I mean. Put it in a
Right,
package for the
so-
annual meeting.
No, I understood that. I understood that. My point is, we should probably look to get as much done as we can.
Yes.
So, I mean, this is great. It's passed, fine. I think the community would have appreciated the language that I had included, but that's fine. I think we should put a system in place to get some other items included. Otherwise, we're not going to really accomplish very much.
Well, that's a very good segue to the second item on our agenda, which is an update on that. And Scott, I think you weren't able to attend our last meeting, so you were sort of voluntold in that meeting along with Robert, and I think Yakov may have volunteered as well to give the bylaws a real onceing over and finding ambiguities and matching things up and coming up with some of those other sort of not new, I'll call them not new proposals, but really just a cleanup. So not sure where that process stands, but that's what's next on our agenda.
I think I sent something out to you, Patrick, and to Scott and Yakov, but I haven't gotten feedback on it.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I must have missed that or didn't appreciate that was for feedback and review yet. So I'll look back and try to get you some response
Look back,
on
I
that.
just went through the bylaws and pointed out about maybe 12 to 15 bylaws that I thought needed to be cleaned up, and certainly talked about the water company issue, which I thought was a major issue that could be addressed by this committee, because I don't know how you stop the water company from passing its own bylaws with that don't seem to have to be reviewed by the board of our POA, and that there should be some bylaw that addresses that, not just necessarily for the water company, but for any subsidiary or any group that is under the umbrella of the Property Owners Association should not be able to create bylaws that are not approved by the board and the community. I would think that ought to be in the bylaws of our organization.
And I looked at this issue a while ago and really cannot remember, Robert, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there a provision in the bylaws that the EGPOA board can change any bylaw of the water company, or is that not in there?
I don't believe that's in our bylaws.
I thought it was.
I don't
Hang
think
on,
there's anything about the water company in our bylaws.
let me, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen, and as we talk through this, I'm gonna go look for that provision.
I
So
would think that Scott, you probably know this. When you did your analysis of the water company, I don't know whether you can speak about it at all, but when you did it, did you come across any regulation or anything written from this community saying that the bylaws, that the water company had the right to create its own bylaws? And I never saw anything like that.
Robert, there's no point to guessing. I don't remember at this point. Let's look and see what's there and proceed. I think the thing that does ring a bell is that the prior board may have added something that the board can't, the Emerald Green Board can't get rid of any board members from the water company.
Yeah, they did that
Yeah.
too.
I think that's what they did,
They did that too.
which is interesting.
You know what,
I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. I do have to switch over to the other committee call. If anybody has anything for me, just feel free to reach out, and I appreciate everybody's hard work. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Oops. Okay. Yeah, no point guessing. I would have to go back and try to figure out where I saw that, and I probably.
Oh, you
should
can
have.
check that, and I'll go back and see that email that I thought I wrote.
You did, and I found it.
Oh, I did. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. There's some very simple issues such as misnumbered paragraphs, Article 2, as well as additions to make things clearer, Article 7, Section 5 and 7. There are possibilities that should be discussed, such as whether a list of members should be made available for certain procedures, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you want to carry that forward, Robert?
Well, I think that there probably should be a subcommittee of this committee that sits down and goes over these clauses and any others, and then assigns to individual members of the subcommittee paragraphs to give a shot to redraft it.
Okay, I have the bylaws in a Word document from Marvin. So Robert, why don't I send that to
Send
you?
that to me, or that'd be helpful, yeah.
Yeah, and then you can sort of redline them from there, because obviously we'll need to show our work when the time comes, I think, and show a red and clean to the community when we propose anything. So I'll send that to you as a starting point.
Yeah, but I think at the last meeting, Jeff, you volunteered to be on that committee too, right?
He's on mute.
He said
He's on
yes,
mute.
I'm new.
Yeah.
Yes, I volunteered up for that, yes.
Great.
Yeah, so I want to make sure that we include you, on all of that correspondence. I'm not sure I sent it to you.
No,
but,
you didn't.
Did I send it?
I don't think I got anything from you recently.
Oh, okay. Scott, you got it though, didn't you?
I believe a while ago, yes. But
Yeah,
it's
a
a
while
while
ago,
ago,
right. Okay.
All right, Jeff, I'll make sure.
I'll resend it to
All
you,
right.
Jeff.
All right.
Can I, just give me your email?
All right, I'm gonna just send it in the chat.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. I
Maybe
think that was-
Zach wants to be on that little committee too.
I think Zach's got his hands full with the water company now.
All right.
I was gonna say, where can I be as this, but also where can I not?
Well, because you had that group that serves your organization. I thought that maybe they would be able to help on that. That's all.
Yeah, no, and he's actually here tonight, but I'm leaning on him for some of that stuff, and I'm re-engaging here, and the stuff that you bring up about the water company. I have different perspectives. I don't know what I'm allowed to sit on and not sit on. I'm trying to get my hands around that, so just tell me to excuse myself or not. But I think that this group here, their specialty lines, they really can bring a different perspective and dynamic to that. I'll lean on them for that. So
Okay. All right, but I'm gonna get that thing to you, Jeff, and then maybe we could start something going with email communications and a Zoom call just among the four of us.
Robert, if I may, why don't you just send a current email out of that one to all of us in one
Will
shot?
do,
This
will
way,
do.
we're all in the same place.
All right, I think that's all I had on our agenda. Anybody got anything else? Leslie, Lisa, anything else you want to add?
Nope, nope, I'm good.
Okay,
There's just one thing I want to bring up.
yeah.
Robert mentioned something about the water company. They basically voted that they're immune from, paying attorney's fees if there's like fraud. How does that like get in there? I mean, Emerald Green could be on the hook for like gazillions of dollars of legal fees for somebody who's like defrauding the community.
I have no
I have-
idea, but I
I
would,
almost
have
passed
copies
out when
of
I
their
read it.
bylaws. I have copies of their bylaws, Jeff. I can send you the copies that I have of in their minutes as well.
All right, is that
Leslie,
in
did
there?
you
Did
see
you
that
actually see
clause?
that?
Leslie, did you see that clause in the bylaws?
I'm not, well, I have to do some research.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah,
Didn't-
that
but
one, that
think
one
he-
concerns me quite a bit because imagine
Jumped
if
out
a
at
board
me.
member did something, that they
Mhm.
could be, that's fraudulent and the community is going to be paying for their legal fees. I mean, it could bury us.
I would hazard a guess that's not enforceable
Yeah,
as
I don't
against
know.
public
I have
policy
no
in the state of
idea.
New York, but
Yeah.
Who knows what's
Yeah,
enforceable?
I have a copy of the bylaws, so I can email you a
Send it to
copy
the
of
group,
it.
Leslie, please.
I'm sorry?
If you can, send it to the group.
Okay, I shall.
Thank you.
All right, very good.
All right, that was all I had to ask.
Thanks, Jeff.
Okay,
All right,
Thank
well,
you.
thank you, everybody, for your time. I appreciate it.
you.
I'm gonna click off the recording and then say goodbye to everybody.
We can call each other.